All right, so have you ever like thought, is there more to life, sexually speaking?
Yeah.
Like, are we just kind of scratching the surface of what's possible?
It's a question a lot of people ask themselves, isn't it?
Yeah, and I actually came across this YouTube channel, Echoes of Insight,
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
and they're asking some really, really interesting questions about exactly that, our potential for like deeper, more transformative sexual experiences.
And even suggesting that maybe, just maybe, some of those deeper experiences could be found by exploring some unconventional paths.
Yeah. Like even going so far as to suggest things like cross-dressing or connecting with men who embody feminine attributes.
So certainly pushing the boundaries.
Oh, yeah. So for this deep dive, we've gathered a whole bunch of different sources.
Oh, wow.
We've got like a historical and psychological overview of cross-dressing.
Okay.
We've got some really interesting personal stories from the CrossDresser Heaven forums. And we're even going to be taking a look at Wilhelm Reich and his theories on orgone energy.
Wow, we're really going deep on this one.
We are. And as always, we're going to be navigating this topic with respect and sensitivity.
Of course.
Focusing on understanding those diverse perspectives and experiences.
Yeah. Our goal is never to endorse any particular viewpoint, but to try to shed some light on the complexities at play.
Exactly. So I guess before we kind of jump into the personal stories and some of the deeper discussions, let's maybe touch on the historical context a little bit. I mean,
Yeah.
Cross-dressing, this isn't some new phenomenon, right?
No, not at all. It's something that's been around for centuries. I mean, think about it. Ancient Greek and Roman theater,
Right.
men played all the roles, including the female characters.
Because women weren't allowed on stage, right?
Exactly.
It's fascinating. It really makes you wonder what those performers maybe discovered about themselves and their own identities through that experience.
Yeah. Like, how could it not have some impact?
It wasn't just ancient times either. I mean, Shakespearean England had that same tradition.
It's true. So many of those iconic female characters we know and love today were originally played by men.
It's amazing. And, it kind of makes me think, it kind of challenges our modern perception of cross-dressing as something that's radical or taboo,
Yeah, it does. Like, imagine a society where it was just accepted, celebrated even.
Yeah, it makes you think about how those societal norms were so different.
Huge difference from the kind of strict gender binaries we often see today.
Yeah.
Though even back then, there were people who pushed those boundaries, and not always just for entertainment,
Yeah, I mean, take Joan of Arc, for instance.
Exactly. A woman who, in the 15th century, puts on male armor and goes to war. She wasn't just acting. She was challenging, like really challenging what it meant to be a woman at that time.
Especially in a time of war. That must have taken incredible courage.
It really does make you think. And, there are lots of stories of women disguising themselves as men during the American Civil War, too.
Wow. What would drive them to do that?
So many reasons, Sometimes it was survival. Sometimes to fight for their beliefs, sometimes even to be spies.
That's amazing. It really shows you how the motivations behind cross-dressing have always been complex, right?
Right.
Like it's not just one thing.
It's about survival. It's about self-expression. It's about pushing back against expectations. All these things kind of wrapped up together.
It's like, what did those individuals discover about themselves through those experiences?
Yeah.
Things they might never have uncovered otherwise, right?
It really makes you think.
It does. And it kind of brings us back to those questions Echoes of Insight was asking. Could exploring those paths, those spaces outside of the norms, lead us to unexpected forms of self-discovery, even maybe within the realm of sexuality?
A question worth considering for sure. Now, let's maybe shift gears a little bit and touch on some of the psychological aspects of cross-dressing.
Okay.
One question that comes up a lot is whether or not it's considered, normal.
Well, and that's a loaded question, right?
Yeah.
I feel like that reflects all that societal unease around anything that challenges gender norms.
It absolutely does. But from a purely psychological perspective, cross-dressing itself, it's not inherently a problem.
Right.
It's not a sign that something's wrong.
Got it.
It's only if it's causing someone significant distress, or preventing them from functioning in their daily life. That's when it might be a cause for concern.
That makes sense. So it's important to remember there's a spectrum of experiences here. And, it's not necessarily tied to gender identity either, right?
No, not at all. Cross-dressing doesn't automatically mean someone is questioning their gender.
Right.
For lots of people, it's just a form of self-expression, a way to explore different parts of themselves, or even just a way to relax, to find some comfort.
Like it's challenging us to think beyond just male and female, right? To acknowledge that human identity is more fluid, more complex than that.
Exactly. But of course, there are times when cross-dressing is connected to gender identity. For some transgender individuals, it might be a part of figuring out who they are, experimenting with how they want to express themselves.
Of course.
But even then, it's just one piece of a much bigger picture.
Right.
And each person's experience is totally unique.
For sure. And it's the same with sexual orientation, right? There's this stereotype out there that cross-dressing is directly linked to being gay or lesbian.
And that's just not true at all.
Right.
People of all sexual orientations engage in cross-dressing.
It's not about who you're attracted to.
Exactly. It's about personal expression and exploration.
Yeah, I see a pattern here. It's like we as humans have this need to categorize everything, put everything into neat little boxes.
We do.
But human experience, especially when it comes to sexuality, is rarely that simple.
It's messy.
Right. And that's okay.
It is. It's about acknowledging that complexity, approaching it with sensitivity, and an open mind.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know we're going to dive into the personal stories in a bit, but before we do that, I wanted to touch on Wilhelm Reich really quick.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A psychoanalyst who really challenged conventional thinking on sexuality.
He developed some pretty unconventional theories, that's for sure.
Yeah. He believed in this thing called orgone energy, which he saw as this universal life force.
Right.
And he thought it was super connected to sexual health and vitality.
Yeah, and his ideas, they were considered, pretty radical.
They were?
Even dangerous, especially by, the mainstream scientific community.
Yeah. He faced some pretty serious consequences for his beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, he ended up imprisoned for his work.
He did.
So while his methods were definitely controversial, he was also a pioneer in a way.
In a way, he was. He challenged those societal norms, those limitations around sexuality.
He did. He was really pushing the boundaries. And I think it all comes back to this yearning for something more, that sense that maybe there's a level of fulfillment we're missing out on.
You're right. It's that desire to explore, to break free from those limitations. So with that in mind, I think it's time to hear from the people who have actually lived these experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's dive into those personal stories and see what insights we can glean from the folks on the CrossDresser Heaven forums.
Let's do it. It's amazing as we go through these personal stories from the CrossDresser Heaven forums, how many of them touch on that same yearning for something more.
Like that feeling that there's a deeper level of experience they're missing.
Exactly. Like those forum members are really grappling with the questions that Echoes of Insight brings up.
Living them out in their own way.
Right. And it really highlights how personal this whole journey is.
Yeah.
One thread that really caught my eye was titled, "The Thrill is Gone."
Ooh, interesting.
And it was started by this woman named Maureen, who was talking about how, when she first started cross-dressing, it was the forbidden aspect of it that really got her going,
Like the thrill of doing something taboo.
Exactly. But she was finding that as she got older, that excitement was starting to fade a bit.
Which makes sense. It's kind of like, I don't know, anything new and exciting. At first, it's all about pushing boundaries. There's a rush that comes with the risk. But
right.
Then what happens?
Right. Like, does that mean the journey's over?
Yeah. Like, where do you go from there?
Well, and that's exactly what she was wrestling with. And the responses from other forum members were so interesting. Some people were like, yeah, I totally get that. That initial thrill, it changes. It becomes something more mellow.
Okay.
A sense of peace.
More about being comfortable with yourself.
Exactly. Like finding contentment in expressing who they truly are.
So it's not about chasing that adrenaline rush forever.
Right.
It's about how those feelings transform.
You're listening to Echoes of Insight, where we dive deep into the topics shaping our world. From the planet and politics to health, consciousness, economy, and alternative lifestyles. If you're enjoying the journey, make sure to subscribe and share this podcast with others who love exploring new perspectives.
Exactly. And for some, the thrill shifts. Like maybe instead of the risk of getting caught, it becomes about perfecting their look,
Oh, I see.
Like experimenting with makeup or fashion, finding the perfect outfit.
So it becomes more about the art, the creative side of it?
Exactly. And of course, for some, those initial pangs of excitement are still there, especially when trying something new or going out in public. It's different for everyone. Right. Which again brings it back to those bigger questions about sexual exploration and searching for deeper experiences.
It does.
It's like what starts as that quest for the unknown can actually turn into something so much deeper, something that touches on our identity, our sense of self.
Exactly. And, it's not always easy. A lot of those stories in the forum talk about the challenges.
Like what?
Well, the expectations from society, internal conflicts, the fear of being judged. One woman, Caroline, I think her name was, talked about that fear, that worry that the thrill might go away completely.
Oh, wow.
But she also acknowledged that when she was cross-dressing, she felt this deep sense of contentment.
Really?
Yeah, like she was truly aligned with herself.
That's amazing.
It's like she was trying to balance those internal desires with those external pressures, Trying to find a place where she could embrace both the joy of expressing herself and the reality of navigating a world that doesn't always get it.
And that's where the forum itself is so important, right?
Huge. It provides that space for connection, for support.
A community where people can share their experiences without judgment.
Absolutely. It's about finding your tribe, people who understand and can offer encouragement. But it's not just about finding comfort. It's also about challenging those misconceptions out there,
Right.
about advocating for greater understanding and acceptance of cross-dressing.
Because there are still so many harmful stereotypes out there.
Oh, absolutely.
It's misunderstood, misrepresented, and, sometimes even pathologized.
It's true, which is why it's so important to keep having these conversations.
Keep sharing these stories.
Yeah, and push for a world where people can truly be themselves without fear of shame.
Because at the end of the day, it's about recognizing the humanity in each person.
Absolutely.
Regardless of how they choose to express themselves.
And that includes how they choose to express themselves sexually, too, right?
Right. And, a lot of questions come up around that, especially the connection between cross-dressing and gender identity. Like, does it always mean someone's unhappy with the gender they were assigned at birth?
That's a big misconception. A lot of people who cross-dress are completely comfortable with their assigned gender.
Sure.
They just, maybe enjoy exploring different parts of their personality.
Right.
Or maybe they find a sense of release, a sense of fulfillment in expressing themselves through clothing and styles that aren't typically associated with their gender.
It's like they're expanding the definition of what it means to be a man or a woman.
Exactly.
Challenging those boxes.
Breaking free. And for some, it might even be about reclaiming parts of themselves that they felt they had to hide because of what society expected of them.
Makes sense.
It's about embracing the fullness of who they are.
I love that. And another question that often comes up is, is it a mental health disorder?
Right. And it's important to be super clear here. Cross-dressing in and of itself is not a disorder. It's a form of self-expression that for most people is perfectly healthy. Now, are there situations where cross-dressing can be linked to other mental health conditions? Yes, of course. But we can't just assume that one causes the other. And even when there is a connection, everyone's experience is different.
Right.
And seeking help is always an option for anyone who's struggling, whether they cross-dress or not.
Exactly. Mental health is complex.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in reaching out for support. But what's interesting is that cross-dressing can actually have positive effects on mental health.
Oh, absolutely.
We talked about how it can be a stress reliever, a way to boost self-confidence, and even a catalyst for personal growth.
It's all about finding what works for you, what helps you feel more true to yourself. And these personal stories really highlight how powerful acceptance can be.
How so?
Well, the people who have found supportive communities or who have come out to loved ones who accept them, they often talk about feeling liberated, more confident, more connected to who they really are.
Like they've finally been given permission to just be themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And on the flip side, those who have been rejected or judged, they describe feeling ashamed, isolated, even like they hate themselves.
It's awful.
It is. And it really underscores how important it is to be kind,
To be understanding.
Yeah. Our words, our actions, they can have a huge impact on others.
It's a good reminder that we all have the power to create spaces where people feel accepted.
In our personal lives and in society as a whole.
Because ultimately, everyone deserves to live authentically.
Without fear.
Without judgment.
Exactly. And it makes you think, how do we respond when someone tells us about their cross-dressing?
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially if you haven't really encountered it before, if you've got, some preconceived ideas about it.
Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. With kindness.
Okay.
With respect.
And listening without judgment.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where they feel safe to share without shame or fear.
Right. Like their identity is not up for debate.
Exactly. And instead of trying to, force our own beliefs on them, we can just listen, ask questions, show our support.
Just let them know they're not alone.
Sometimes that's the most powerful thing we can do.
Just listen with an open heart.
Yeah. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, regardless of our differences.
I love that. And, by doing that, by fostering that culture of acceptance, we can help create a world where everyone feels empowered to be their true selves.
To live authentically.
And that authenticity, that willingness to be true to who we are, that's what allows us to explore those deeper levels of experience, to connect with ourselves and others in ways that are more meaningful.
And maybe even more ecstatic.
Exactly. It's about breaking free from those limiting beliefs and embracing the full spectrum of human experience.
Because maybe, just maybe, in that embrace, we'll find the key to a more fulfilling, more ecstatic life.
It's funny, even though those personal stories we talked about didn't really get into, like, deeper sexual experiences explicitly, they still kind of tie back to that whole yearning for something more that Echoes of Insight is all about,
Totally. Like, those folks, through their own journeys of self-discovery, they're already tapping into a level of authenticity that opens up all sorts of possibilities.
Yeah. It's like they're not afraid to challenge the norms, to explore those parts of themselves that society might tell them to hide.
Exactly. And that's really what Echoes of Insight is getting at, right? Like, could that same willingness to explore, to push boundaries, lead to more profound experiences, sexually speaking?
Exactly. So that brings us back to their more, I guess, provocative question.
Right.
Could exploring those unconventional paths, like cross-dressing or connecting with men who embody feminine attributes, be the key to unlocking, more profound, maybe even ecstatic sexual experience?
It's a big question, and one that deserves a nuanced approach. We're not saying this is a one-size-fits-all solution or anything like that. What's really interesting to me is the motivation behind it all.
What's driving people to explore those paths?
Yeah, it's that desire to push past the ordinary, to go beyond those pre-scripted ways of thinking and experiencing things.
And to tap into something deeper.
Exactly. And think about it, when you step outside those rigid roles and expectations, when you embrace a more fluid sense of self, it opens up a whole world of possibilities, right?
Suddenly those old ideas about what's acceptable or normal don't matter as much.
And you're free to explore what truly resonates with you.
Both on your own and with a partner.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming that sense of agency, that authenticity in every aspect of your life, including your intimate experiences.
Because this exploration goes way beyond just the physical act.
It does. It's about expanding our whole understanding of intimacy, of connection, of pleasure.
It's about letting go of those beliefs that might be holding us back from experiencing the full potential of our sexuality.
It strikes me that this whole conversation really ties into how we think about gender and sexuality in general. Well, we're finally starting to move beyond those rigid binary categories.
Male, female, gay, straight.
Right. And we're starting to acknowledge that there's so much more fluidity, so much more complexity to what it means to be human.
And that's a beautiful thing.
It is. It opens up so many doors. It encourages us to question assumptions, to break free from those societal scripts, and to discover new ways of connecting with each other.
So where does that leave us? We've explored the history and psychology of cross-dressing. We've heard some incredible personal stories, and we've even touched on the, let's say, colorful theories of Wilhelm Reich.
And I think even though we didn't definitively answer whether or not exploring unconventional path leads to more sexual ecstasy, we've definitely uncovered some food for thought.
Definitely.
I mean, we've seen how powerful it can be to challenge norms, to embrace who you truly are, and to be open to new experiences.
And that journey, that willingness to explore beyond what we think we know, who knows? Maybe that's the key to unlocking a more fulfilling, a more ecstatic life experience.
Both sexually and beyond.
And on that note, to our listeners out there, we leave you with this. Dare to question, dare to explore, dare to embrace every part of who you are. Because within that embrace, within that journey of self-discovery, you might just find a life that's more authentic, more passionate, and maybe even more ecstatic than you ever imagined possible.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Echoes of Insight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who loves exploring big ideas. Together, let's keep the conversation going. See you next time.